Lila held the flashlight tight, her breath forming fog as she stood before the huge entrance to the abandoned shopping center. A gust of wind rattled the broken glass doors. She knew it was a bad idea, but she couldn't back down. She had to prove herself. It was dark and dark. Her flashlight beam cut through the thick dust. The empty mall was full of broken windows, tipped over mannequins, and dirty escalators. The mall closed years ago after some strange accidents. People said it was haunted and kids dared each other to explore it. Lila didn't believe in superstitions, but she felt uneasy as she went deeper into the mall. She stopped, her light catching something on the wall. Strange symbols had been scratched into the wall, circles with eyes in them. They were repeated along the walls, leading deeper into the building. Lila's heart beat faster. She could turn back now. But she took a deep breath and kept going. Her footsteps echoed and the air got colder. She pulled her jacket tighter, her breath visible in front of her as the temperature dropped. The air felt heavy, and the silence was oppressive. She reached the central atrium, where a fountain stood, now dry and littered with debris. In the dim light, she saw a circle of melted candles in the shape of strange things. A notebook lay at the base of the fountain, its pages yellowed and torn. She picked it up. The pages were filled with sketches of graves, tombstones, and symbols. She looked at one page in particular. It showed a map of the mall with a path leading outside to a graveyard. Her heart beat fast. There was no cemetery nearby. The map and note were clear. They connect through death. Find the link. The air grew colder, and a whisper echoed. Lila turned, but the darkness didn't move. The whisper came again, louder. She felt her skin crawl as she looked around. Her flashlight flickered, and she saw shadowy figures moving in her vision. She ran, the whispers following her. She came out another way and found herself in a graveyard. Tombstones stretched out before her in the moonlight. She was shocked. This isn't real. She moved through the graves, her heart pounding. The air smelled of earth and decay. The whispers came from all around her, and she felt like she was being watched. Her flashlight flickered again. She saw a fresh grave with dirt piled up beside it. The headstone was blank. She went to him, her heart beating fast. She saw something carved into the stone. It was her name. She stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from her grasp. She was surrounded by darkness and felt cold hands pulling her towards an open grave. She screamed, but the voices drowned her out. She saw shadowy figures watching from the graveyard as the earth closed over her. Ethan walked home from work, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. He usually loved this time of night, the bright lights, the chatter from late-night cafes, the feeling that the city was alive. But tonight was different. The crowds were thinner, and the usual hustle was missing. The air was thick with tension. As he crossed the road, he saw the streetlights were flickering. Not unusual in a city that never sleeps, but tonight it felt deliberate. He ignored it and kept walking. But he saw an electronic billboard glitching above him. The screen showed distorted images, faces stretched and twisted, eyes following him. Ethan stopped, rubbing his eyes. He thought it was a trick of tiredness. He'd been working too much and was tired. But the billboard was still glitching when he opened his eyes. The faces were replaced by static, then words formed a message. "It sees you." He got goosebumps. He took a deep breath to calm himself. "Just a prank," he muttered. Someone hacked the system. He kept moving, picking up his pace as the city seemed to stretch and shift. The skyscrapers looked taller and darker. The sidewalks were empty. He walked faster, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The city's heartbeat was different tonight. It was deeper, vibrating through the concrete beneath his feet. The lights flickered and shadows danced on the walls. Ethan's heart started to beat faster. Something was wrong. He felt eyes on him, watching him. He went into an alley to get to his apartment faster. The narrow alley felt like it was getting smaller as he moved deeper into it. The graffiti was strange. faces, eyes, and hands on the walls. He walked faster, breathing hard. The alleyway twisted and turned, becoming a maze of shadows. He tried to turn back, but every path led him further into the maze. The walls closed in, and the hum in the air became a pulse. He felt it under his skin like a heartbeat. The alley opened up into a main road, but it was different. The buildings were taller, and their windows black. The city was dark and cold. He shivered and looked around. The road was deserted, no cars or people. The ground rippled as he walked. He stumbled and caught himself against a building. The vibrations got stronger. The hum was now a roar. He covered his ears, but the sound got in and the world around him changed. He turned a corner and saw them, dark shapes moving in the shadows. They moved towards him along the ground. He backed away, heart pounding, but the city seemed to be shifting to trap him. He ran, his footsteps echoing. The lights went out, leaving him in darkness. The billboards came back on, showing his face again, but now his eyes were black and his mouth was a scream. The tendrils wrapped around his legs and pulled him down. He screamed and tried to escape, but the city took him in. The last thing he saw was the skyline, moving and alive. The city had taken him, and he was part of it now. Mara walked up the mountain path through the wind and fog. The storm came quickly and turned the landscape into a maze of shadows. She had hiked these trails for years, but the storm was worse than she'd ever seen. She shivered and pulled her coat tighter, looking for shelter. She saw a small, weather-beaten cabin through the fog. It was old, the windows dark, but it was her only option. She ran to the door and opened it. Inside, the air was cold and musty, and the floor creaked. The walls were lined with animal trophies. She ignored the strange feeling and put her bag down to warm her hands. She tried to light a fire, but the matches kept going out. The wind outside seemed to scream, and she paused, feeling a chill. The cabin felt wrong. She ignored the feeling and kept working on the fire. As she struck another match, she heard a whisper. She froze, the match burning down to her fingertips. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice echoing in the small space. The whisper came again, clearer this time, but the words were unintelligible. Her heart pounded as she scanned the room, her eyes darting to the old photos on the wall. The wind blew harder, and the shadows in the room seemed to get longer. She felt eyes on her, cold and predatory. The whispers got louder and more confusing. She tried to ignore it, but she felt more scared. Mara grabbed her flashlight and turned it on, just as the door opened and a gust of icy wind came in. The fire went out, leaving her in the dark. She turned on the flashlight and saw something at the door. It was a tall figure with long limbs. Its eyes glowed blue, and it stepped forward, taking the warmth from the air. She tripped over the uneven floor. Her hand touched cold metal, a set of chains on the wall. Rusted and old, they were thick enough to hold a bear. She realized they weren't for animals. The figure moved closer, and she stumbled back. The whispers got louder. The photos on the wall seemed to shift, the blurred faces now filled with terror. Mara ran out of the cabin into the storm. The wind was strong, making it hard for her to find the trail. The mountain was hidden in fog. She felt something behind her, its cold fingers almost touching her. She ran, branches scratching her face, her breath coming in gasps. She fell to her knees and looked back. The figure stood in the fog, watching her. It didn't move, but she felt its gaze pierce the darkness. The whispers were louder than ever. She realized they weren't just coming from the figure, they were all around her. Mara got up and ran through the trees. The trail was gone. There was a maze of rocks and ice. The mountain shifted and cracked as she jumped over rocks. She felt the presence closing in and saw shadows moving with glowing eyes in the fog. She reached a cliff edge, the drop hidden in mist. There was no way forward, and the whispers grew louder, a chorus of agony. She turned and saw the figure just feet away, its eyes burning bright. It raised an arm and she felt cold, her limbs freezing. As the darkness closed in, she felt herself slipping. She looked into the figure's eyes and saw the faces from the photos, lost and terrified. The whispers said, "Run!" But there was nowhere to go. The last thing she heard was the wind as the ground crumbled. The mountain claimed her, and the fog swallowed her whole.